But there's some important stuff that we need to go through, because I'm assuming, since you're in this program, that you are going to spend probably the majority of the rest of your careers working in a laboratory environment. So it's really important that you start out working the right way. Part of my job and my staff's job is to go out on campus and audit or inspect annually all of the research labs on campus. And we find very often people who have been working in labs for a long time who are doing things wrong. And they're doing things wrong because they have been doing it wrong ever since they started. They were taught to do it the wrong way. And they just don't know any better. And once we show them that, you know, there's a better or safer way to do something, it takes them a little time to adjust. There's a little learning curve because they're so used to doing it a certain way. But they get the hang of it, and you know, they switch their work practices. But if you learn it right the first time, that's the way you're going to do it forever. So it's really important that as you're starting out working in a lab, that you learn things properly. So that's why it's great that I was asked to do this and teach you guys right the first time. So we're going to start out. We've gone through the risk groups. We've gone through the biosafety levels. Now we're going to talk about how we put those things in practice in the lab. And the first thing we're going to talk about today are engineering controls. Engineering controls are used to reduce potential exposure either by removing, eliminating, or isolating the hazard from the worker. So the basic concept here is that to the extent feasible, sometimes it's very feasible, sometimes it's not feasible at all, but to whatever the extent feasible, the work environment and the job itself should be designed to eliminate hazards or reduce the exposure to hazards in the workplace. We do this by putting things in the lab like chemical fume hoods, biological safety cabinets, localized exhaust hoods, safety showers and eye washes. We use engineered safety sharps. We use special biological sharps containers for our waste. These are all things that are considered engineering controls. This is our first line of defense when we are talking about exposure to hazards in the workplace or in any research lab. We'll talk about a couple different types of containment equipment. And these are the most common things when we talk about engineering controls. In a biomedical lab, when you're working with infectious materials, the most common thing you're going to see is a biosafety cabinet. You might also hear them called biological safety cabinets, tissue culture hoods, BSCs. These are all the same things, okay? Class 2 biosafety cabinets, or BSCs, do three things. They provide personnel, product, and environmental protection. Okay? Personnel are you, the worker. The product is your research material. And the environment is the lab and the surrounding area. It could be outside, it could be the hallway, and the other people in the lab. They do this by using HEPA filters, or high efficiency particulate air filters, in both the supply, which is what the air that is provided to the work surface, or this area in here. Your supply filter is right here, okay? And the air blows down through here into your work surface, and your HEPA filter, which is actually up here, usually in a box or in this area up here. They're very common in BSL-2 and BSL-3 labs, also in BSL-4 labs, but you'll also see them a lot of times in BSL-1 labs, not because people are working with hazardous agents, but because they're doing tissue culture, and they want to keep their product clean. They don't want to contaminate their tissue culture, so they use a tissue culture hood to keep their product free of contamination. It's really, really important that you understand that a biosafety cabinet and a chemical fume hood are not the same thing. I cannot tell you how many lab inspections we go on where we say, we have a whole section in our lab inspection where we look at the biosafety cabinets. If we're doing a biosafety level 2 inspection, there's probably, I don't know, maybe 10 questions on our lab inspection on the biosafety cabinet and the practices and procedures used in your biosafety cabinet. So we'll say to the person, show me your biosafety cabinet. And they walk over and they say, it's right here. No. That's a chemical fume hood. They have no idea what a biosafety cabinet is. They take us to their fume hood. And lo and behold, they're working with a biological agent, or they're doing tissue culture work in their chemical fume hood. And these are people who are PhDs or postdocs or whatever. I mean, they may be a PI and they're working in their chemical fume hood doing tissue culture work. They might as well do it on the bench top because it's completely contaminated at this point. They have no idea what this is to be used for. So it's really important that you know the difference between these two pieces of equipment. They are for completely different applications, okay? Fume hoods are for chemical hazards, chemical fume hoods. Biosafety cabinets, biological hazards, okay? There are two main differences. Fume hoods have inward airflow only. So in a chemical fume hood, these are the ones that are usually built into the building. Many times you'll see a kind of an alcove in the lab space. They usually don't have a door. It's just kind of a space that's kind of built off the side of the lab. And you'll see a fume hood on one side, maybe on either side of the alcove. They're built into the building and they exhaust out through the building, okay? What happens is these draw air out of the room, in through this window, and it goes up through the building exhaust and out of the building. That's all they do. They're very simple pieces of equipment. Biosafety cabinet, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. Most of the cabinets that you'll see around campus here look similar to this. They're freestanding. Some of them will be connected to a building system, a building exhaust, or they may have what we call a canopy connection. So they have what looks like a canopy over top of them, which collects the exhaust and sends it out through the building. But these have both inward airflow and downward airflow. So they pull air in through this window, and it goes in through these little holes, and then there's holes like right here, a little grill right here. Pulls air in here, and also pulls air through here. It also recirculates air and blows it through the top and back down into the work surface. And that's the air that keeps your work surface clean. So the big difference is that there's no product protection in a fume hood. This is pulling all the contaminated air in through the building or from the room. So if you're working with something in here, this is not clean. Okay? If you're doing tissue culture in a fume hood, you've contaminated all your cells. Anything that's floating around the room are now in your cell culture. But if you're doing tissue culture in a biosafety cabinet, you've got clean air blowing down and you've got clean air coming in, and the room air comes in and goes right down into the HEPA filtration and then gets recirculated into your biosafety cabinet. The other difference is fume hoods don't have any HEPA filtration. So if you're working with any biohazards in a fume hood, they're just getting exhausted right out of the building into the environment. There's no HEPA filtration before they get exhausted. Whereas a biosafety cabinet, there's a HEPA filter up here. So before it gets exhausted into the room, it goes out through a HEPA filter, which filters out all the infectious agents. Sometimes your fume hoods will have a filter, but they're different. They might have a charcoal filter or some other type of filter for chemical agents, or if you're doing rad work, if you're doing iodinations, they'll have a filter for that type of work, but not for biological agents. If you ever have any questions about what type of hood you should be working in, you should always contact your health and safety officer wherever you're working to make sure that you're working in the right type of safety hood or right type of engineering control. There's another type of engineering control that you may see. They're not super common anymore, but there are some old ones floating around, and if you're working with any type of hazardous agent, you do not want to use this. This is called a clean bench. It's a laminar flow clean bench. And these are not, they look sort of like biosafety cabinets, but they function very differently. The main difference when you look at them, biosafety cabinets have a glass sash or a window here. Laminar flow benches do not. They're completely open in the front, okay? And their HEPA filter is along this back wall. So this whole back wall has like a metal grill, okay? What these do is they pull air in through the front, little grill here, and it recirculates out the back and it blows straight out at the user over the work surface. And they're called clean benches for a reason, because they provide a clean work surface. But that's all they do. They blow everything right out into the face of the person who's sitting in front of it. So you absolutely do not want to use anything hazardous in one of these because it's blowing everything right into your face. They're not used very often anymore. The only place we see them, there's a few in plant pathology. They're not using any human hazards over there. They're very big in the electronics industry. Computer electronics, they need a clean work surface when they're building electronic, circuitry. So they use these clean benches to do that. Obviously, they're not working with anything hazardous, so it's not a big deal. But these, if you see one of these in the lab, you do not want to use it for hazardous agents. If you're working in a biosafety cabinet,